Chief, are you deaf, or just admiring the grain of the mahogany? The voice, sharp and condescending, sliced through the hushed tension of the Pentagon briefing room. Brigadier General Marcus Sterling stood with his arms crossed, his uniform so crisp it looked like it could cut glass. His gaze was fixed on the man standing quietly before the presentation screen, a man who seemed entirely out of place. Chief Petty Officer Cade Callahan didn't flinch. He simply blinked once, his eyes the color of a stormy sea, and adjusted a file on the lectern. He was perhaps a decade older than anyone else in the room besides the general. His face a roadmap of sun and wind and worry. His utility uniform, while clean, was faded at the seams and softened with 1,000 washings. It hung on his frame, not with the rigid perfection of Sterling's, but with the comfortable familiarity of a second skin. Beside the gleaming shoes and pressed trousers of the other officers, he looked like a relic from a forgotten war, a humble parish priest who had wandered into the Vatican. The room itself was a sterile theater of power, all polished wood, muted lighting, and the faint hum of climate control. Flags stood like silent, decorated sentinels in the corners. It was a place for theories and strategies, for PowerPoints and projections, not for men who carried the dust of far-off places in the very lines of their skin. General Sterling let out an impatient sigh, a sound designed for maximum public effect. "We are on a schedule, Chief. This is the Joint Chiefs Special Projects Briefing, not a VFW hall meeting. Your little gadget is one of a dozen items on the agenda, so if you could possibly begin before the heat death of the universe, we'd all be grateful." Several junior officers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting from the general's sneering face to the chief's impassive one. Callahan, or Cal, as his file read, simply nodded. He didn't look angry or intimidated. He looked patient. It was a patience that was unnerving, the kind a mountain has with the wind. He tapped the screen, bringing up the first slide. It wasn't a sleek graphic, but a simple, grainy photo of a piece of equipment that looked brutally functional, all matte black metal and exposed wiring. "This," Cal began, his voice low and steady, a gravelly baritone that seemed to absorb the room's anxious energy, "is the Echopraxia 7 deployment module. It's designed for solo acoustic signature masking during covert infiltration." He spoke with an economy of words, each one chosen for function, not flair. He was a builder explaining a tool, not a salesman pitching a product, and the distinction was lost on no one, least of all the general who thrived on salesmanship. Sterling scoffed, a small, ugly sound. "Acoustic signature masking? Chief, we have stealth drones that are quieter than a priest's prayer. We have satellite cloaking. We are in the business of systemic, network-centric warfare. You're presenting us with a glorified noise canceller. Forgive me if I'm not impressed." He gestured dismissively at the screen. "This is old-school thinking. It's a solution for a problem that we've already solved a dozen times over with superior technology. It's a relic, just like the lone wolf operator mentality it's designed for. We don't send one man in anymore. We send a system. We send overwhelming, data-driven force." Cal didn't argue. He just moved to the next slide, which showed a complex schematic. "With respect, sir," Cal said, his tone perfectly even, "a system can be hacked. A network can be jammed. Overwhelming force announces its presence. This is for the moments when none of that is an option, when the mission requires a ghost." The general's eyes narrowed. He was a man who saw disagreement not as a point of discussion but as a personal affront. He noticed, for the first time, a small, almost invisible stain on the cuff of Cal's sleeve. "Is that coffee, Chief?" Sterling asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Or did you get some grease on yourself while tinkering with your little ghost box? One must maintain standards even if one's work is rudimentary." Across the table, Major Hayes of the Army's Asymmetric Warfare Group watched the exchange with a growing sense of unease. He was a young officer, but he'd spent enough time in the field to know the difference between parade ground polish and genuine steel. General Sterling was the former, all gleaming brass and loud pronouncements. Chief Callahan was something else entirely. Hayes ignored the worn uniform and the tired eyes. He saw the things Sterling, in his insulated world of strategy sessions and political maneuvering, was blind to. He saw the man's posture. Cal wasn't standing at attention, but he wasn't relaxed either. He was poised, his weight perfectly centered, a subtle readiness that spoke of thousands of hours of instinctual conditioning. It was the stillness of a predator, not the slouch of a subordinate. Hayes watched Cal's hands as he gestured towards the screen. They were scarred and calloused. A working man's hands, but they moved with an impossible, fluid economy. There was no wasted motion, no nervous fidgeting. Then Hayes saw it, a detail so small it was almost invisible. As Cal reached to tap the screen again, his sleeve rode up by a fraction of an inch, revealing the edge of a tattoo on his forearm. It was a trident, but it was different. Darker, more stylized, and entwined with something else. A shape Hayes couldn't quite make out. Something skeletal and spectral. It wasn't a standard-issue seal tattoo, it was something else. Something private. Something earned in a place that didn't issue certificates. Sterling, oblivious, continued his attack, shifting from professional disdain to personal insult. I see from your file, Chief, that you're a single father. Commendable, of course. But it does raise questions about focus. A man's mind can't be in two places at once. It can't be on high-stakes project development and parent-teacher conferences. The jab was low and cruel, designed to unbalance him, to force an emotional reaction that Sterling could then label as unprofessional. But Cal's expression didn't change. The only sign of any impact was a fractional tightening of the muscles around his jaw. He let the insult hang in the air for a moment, letting its ugliness be felt by everyone in the room. Then he simply said, "My focus has never been an issue, sir." The quiet dignity of the response was more powerful than any angry retort could have been. It was a steel door slamming shut. Hayes felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The general was a man walking into a minefield, convinced it was a rose garden because he couldn't see the mines. He was mocking the very qualities in this man, his stillness, his economy, his unbelievable control, that should have been setting off every alarm bell in his head. This wasn't just a chief petty officer. This was someone who had survived things Sterling couldn't even imagine. Major Hayes leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on the unassuming chief. The name, Callahan, stirred a memory, a whisper from a classified briefing years ago. It was about a mission deep in the Hindu Kush, a recovery operation that had gone catastrophically wrong. The official report was heavily redacted, but the scuttlebutt in the special operations community spoke of a lone operator who had held off an overwhelming enemy force for 36 hours, protecting a fallen comrade until extraction could arrive. The operator's name was never mentioned in the official channels, only a call sign. Caliban. A ghost. A legend whispered about in hushed tones. Hayes looked again at the quiet man enduring the general's tirade. He saw the slight limp Cal tried to hide when he shifted his weight. He saw the network of fine white scars around his knuckles. And then he saw the definitive marker. Cal had a habit, a small unconscious tic. He would reach into his pocket and his thumb would rub against something small and round. Just once, as Sterling paused for breath, Cal's hand came out of his pocket to rest on the lectern, and Hayes saw the object for a fraction of a second. It was a challenge coin, but it was unlike any he had ever seen. It was black, completely devoid of markings, its edges worn smooth as a river stone. It was the rumored marker of a unit that officially didn't exist. A Tier 1 entity so secret, its members' records were scrubbed clean, their identities buried under layers of black ink and bureaucratic firewalls. Hayes felt the blood drain from his face. He wasn't just watching a general berate a chief. He was watching a child throw rocks at a monument. Sterling, now fully invested in his performance, pointed a damning finger at the final slide on the screen, which detailed the results of a field test. It listed a series of successes under extreme duress, culminating in a staggering statistic: 0 friendly casualties, 32 averted. The general laughed out loud, a harsh, braying sound that echoed in the silent room. Averted casualties? Chief, this is a document for the Joint Chiefs, not a Hollywood script. 32 averted casualties. The number is absurd. It's statistically improbable. This entire report reads like a work of fiction. Who signed off on this? Your daughter's elementary school principal. This was the final, unforgivable insult. It wasn't just an attack on Cal's professionalism or his person. It was an attack on his word, his honor, the very currency of a warrior. The room fell into a deathly silence. Every officer held their breath, waiting for the explosion. It never came. Cal stood motionless for a long moment, the general's laughter still hanging in the air like poison gas. He looked Sterling directly in the eye, and for the first time, a flicker of something cold and ancient moved in the depths of his gaze. "The data," he said, his voice barely a whisper but carrying the weight of an oath, "is accurate, sir." Before Sterling could formulate a reply, the heavy oak door at the back of the room swung open. A hush fell, deeper than before. In the doorway stood a man who needed no introduction. General Peterson, the 4-star chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, stood surveying the scene, his face an unreadable mask of authority. His aide stood deferentially behind him. The room snapped to attention, chairs scraping, bodies stiffening. Sterling's face went from crimson with rage to a blotchy, panicked red. He spun around, stammering, "General Peterson, sir, we weren't expecting you. An honor, sir." Peterson ignored him completely. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the room and landed on Cal. A complex emotion played across the chairman's face. A mixture of surprise, relief, and a profound, almost sorrowful respect. He walked forward, his footsteps the only sound in the vast room, moving past the saluting officers as if they were statues. He walked straight up to the lectern and stopped in front of the quiet chief petty officer. The two men looked at each other, and in that shared gaze, 1,000 battles were remembered. "Cal," Peterson said, his voice quiet but resonant with command. "They told me you were stateside. I didn't believe them. It's good to see you." He then turned, his gaze finally falling upon Brigadier General Sterling, and the temperature in the room dropped by 20 degrees. Peterson's eyes were chips of ice. "General," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "I believe you were questioning the chief's report." Peterson held up a thin, black folder marked with the highest security classification. He opened it. "For those of you in this room who are unfamiliar with the man General Sterling has been so casually disrespecting, allow me to provide some context." His voice was laced with cold fury. "This is Chief Petty Officer Cade Callahan, or, as he was known for 15 years of service in a unit whose name none of you are cleared to hear, Master Chief Callahan." A collective, silent gasp seemed to pass through the room. Master Chief? A rank he didn't wear, a history he didn't advertise. He is, without exaggeration, one of the most decorated and effective special operators this country has ever produced. Peterson's eyes bored into Sterling. "You mocked his old-school thinking. Master Chief Callahan wrote the book on modern asymmetric warfare. He didn't read it in a classroom, General. He wrote it in blood and sand and ice on missions that will never be declassified. He is the ghost you build your systems to hunt." Peterson then tapped the screen showing the field test results. "And this report you called fiction? The one with the statistically improbable numbers?" He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. That wasn't a simulation, it was Operation Night Shard. A high-value target had acquired a dirty bomb component and was meeting with a terrorist cell in a fortified compound. We were planning a full-scale assault with the Delta team. 32 men. The chairman's voice dropped even lower, becoming a near-reverent whisper that every person in the room strained to hear. The mission parameters were impossible. A frontal assault would have been a bloodbath and risked the target detonating the device. We needed a miracle. We needed a ghost. He looked from the file to Cal, his expression one of pure awe. Master Chief Callahan proposed a solo infiltration to test this new masking equipment. He argued he could get in, neutralize the primary target, secure the asset, and get out, proving the viability of the tech and saving the lives of the entire assault team. Command considered it a suicide mission. We approved it because he was the only man on Earth who could have even attempted it. The room was so quiet that the sound of a pin dropping would have been a thunderclap. Sterling stood frozen, his face a mask of dawning horror, his arrogance stripped away to reveal the terrified, ambitious man beneath. Master Chief Callahan went in alone, Peterson continued, his voice ringing with the authority of absolute truth. He navigated a minefield, bypassed a dozen guards, and eliminated the HVT and his entire personal security detail, 7 men, without firing a single shot. He secured the asset and exfiltrated before the main enemy force even knew he was there. The 32 averted casualties you found so amusing, General, was the entire Delta Force team that was waiting on the perimeter. His report isn't fiction. It is the after-action report for one of the most successful and flawlessly executed operations in the history of U.S. Special Operations. He was the field test. Peterson closed the folder with a soft, final snap. The man you have spent the last 20 minutes belittling has saved more American lives than you have commanded soldiers. Show some damn respect. In the profound, ringing silence that followed, General Peterson turned back to face Cal. He didn't offer a handshake or a pat on the back. Such gestures were inadequate. Instead, the 4-star chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officer in the nation, drew himself up to his full height. He raised his hand to his brow in the sharpest, most respectful salute Sterling had ever witnessed. It wasn't a salute from a superior to a subordinate. It was a salute from one warrior to another, an acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid. "It is an honor to have you back, Master Chief," Peterson said, his voice thick with emotion. For a moment, no one moved. Then Major Hayes, his face pale with awe, rose to his feet and rendered his own salute. Another officer followed, then another and another, until every uniformed person in the room, except for the petrified General Sterling, was on their feet, saluting the quiet man in the worn uniform. Cal didn't bask in the moment. He simply gave Peterson a short, appreciative nod, the barest hint of a weary smile touching his lips. "Just doing my job, sir," he said quietly. Then he glanced at his simple, functional wristwatch. "If that's all, General, I need to be excused. I have a parent-teacher conference at 1500. My daughter, Sarah, she's getting an award for her science project on tectonic plates." The simple, domestic detail was more stunning than any medal could have been. It was the final, perfect testament to his character. The legendary warrior's most important mission now was being a father. Peterson's stern expression softened. He clapped a hand on Cal's shoulder. "Go be a dad, Master Chief. You've earned it more than any man I know." He then turned his head, his gaze falling like a guillotine on Sterling. "General, my office now." As Cal walked toward the door, the assembled officers holding their salutes until he had passed, he left behind the wreckage of a general's career and the resounding truth that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It is quiet, it is humble, and it is measured not in the noise it makes, but in the lives it saves.